Asia, the great landmass that extends from the Atlantic to the Pacific, where 3/4 of the world's population lives today, is the birthplace of all major religions in the world. Asia is also the cradle of Christianity and the Christian faith. Christianity was present in India from the 1st century since the arrival of Christ's disciple, St. Thomas, in AD 52. In the 7th century, Christianity was introduced to China through Nestorian missionaries. During the 16th century, Roman Catholic missionaries started becoming active in Asia, and it wasn't until the 19th century that large-scale Protestant missionary work took place in several Asian countries. Though Christians are still a small minority, there are several millions of Christians in Asia due to the work of Western missionaries. Most of the churches in Asia came into being as an outcome of missionary work of churches and mission agencies from Western countries. However, 1 or 2 centuries ago, mission concepts of those churches and agencies would often not be relevant to the realities of Asia. The formation of an Asian ecumenical movement, and subsequently the founding of the Christian Conference of Asia, can be traced back to the time of the 1938 Tambaram Missionary Conference, where Asia church leaders discussed about the need for separate meetings of Asian churches within Asia. The Eastern Asia Christian Conference, held in Bangkok in 1949, was the first major Christian conference to be held on Asian soil. Asian church representatives formed the majority of participants, and the whole conference was planned and directed by Asians. 8 years later, in March of 1957, the Prapat Conference of Asian Church Leaders was organized to address some of the emerging concerns in Asia. Leaders of churches and national councils in Asia came together for the first time in Asian church history.
During the time of the Prapat conference, when it was initiated, some people had doubts whether Prapat was similar to that of the 1955 meeting of the Afro-Asian Nations Political Leaders Conference that was also held in Indonesia, in Bandung. And the Bandung conference was in a way challenging the Western dominance in the global affairs. So Dr. Vissert, the then General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, feared that the Bandung psychology might have an impact on the Prapat Church Leaders Conference deliberations. So there could be a move for an independent regional ecumenical organization without reference to the global ecumenical bodies such as the World Council of Churches or the International Missionary Council. However, it was proved at the end of the Prapat conference that the intention of the Asian church leaders were not to create an ecumenical power block within the global ecumenical movements, and Prapat conference was not an ecclesiastical Bandung as it was originally suspected by the World Council of Churches General Secretary or the International Missionary Council General Secretary or other Western church leaders at that time. Vissert himself later admitted that Asian Christians at Prapat certainly believed that their churches and their countries should draw together, that they had common problems and a common task to address within Asia. One of the strong arguments made by the Asian church leaders at the Prapat conference was that the formation of a regional ecumenical organization like CCA in Asia would make the voice of Asian churches more clearly heard in the worldwide ecumenical movements. That was their needs, and that was the concern that they expressed at that time.
D.T. Niles was one of the main pillars of the Prapat conference. He subsequently became the first General Secretary of the first regional ecumenical organization, the EACC, which was the forerunner of the CCA.
D.T. Niles used to say, ecumenism was understood as starting with the world denominational bodies, and they discuss over there, and then we are either to follow or we have make comments and all that. But he said no, that kind of dealing with ecumenism at that level is something that is very artificial, and it becomes dehydrated, he said. We have to start ecumenism in our own grassroots. Across the street, there is that church, we church, another community. We work together.
When the CCA for the first time met in Prapat, we have organized a very big rally. Maybe at least 300,000 people were coming. I think the largest rally at all so far. It is important that when church leaders of all Asian countries come together, they be related to the meeting of the Christians in that place, as many as possible, so that the grassroots, the members of the congregation, know what's happening. So that is very, very important at the time, and since then, the name of CCA is rooted among the congregation.
In 1957, when the fathers met at Prapat, 4 of our members, lay and clergy, were over here at that function.
CCA has been journeying together with its member constituencies and networks, addressing the concerns of mission and unity within the wider context of ecumenism. For CCA, ecumenism is addressing the concerns of all God's people in the household of God.
We are called to cooperate with each other, to journey together, and to celebrate and witness being Christian in the world.
The assembly themes of CCA speak of socio-economic and political issues in Asia, as well as other various challenges. Enabling churches and Christians to participate in people's movements and in the struggles of the marginalized and alienated based on Christian values and principles has been an imperative of the mission perspective of CCA.
In the past, the Christian Conference of Asia has been involved in a lot of issues that the churches and peoples are facing. In my particular context, for instance, when we were faced with the Marcos dictatorship and the long years of martial law, one of those that have accompanied us in our struggle to restore democracy has been CCA, its programs, and the member churches.
As the journey of Asian churches and ecumenical councils continued, CCA was recognized as the coordinating and facilitating body of the Asian ecumenical movement.
What I try to do as a CCA staff person or general secretaries, I try to promote more ecumenical spirit in the region.
With regard to CCA itself, I think CCA has made a great contribution to the Asian churches in the Asian region.
CCA has done a wonderful job, and I think most of the programs in essence were very good.
Over the decades, CCA covered innumerable issues and themes pertinent to Asian context. Starting from Prapat, Indonesia in 1957, the theme addressed was Our Common Evangelistic Task. The Kuala Lumpur Assembly of 1959 addressed the theme Witnessing Together. And the theme of the Third Assembly held in Bangkok in 1964 was the Christian community within the human community, which reflected a greater awareness of the church within the larger society. And in 1968, the Fourth Assembly took place in Bangkok again, and the theme chosen was In Christ, All Things Hold Together. The Fifth Assembly, held in Singapore in 1973, marked a transition in the life of CCA, and the theme addressed was Christian Action in Asian Struggle.
It was in the year 1973, where the assembly was held in Singapore. And this can be regarded now a watershed in Asian ecumenical history.
The constitution was changed, the leadership was identified differently, and it seems, I think, the people who thought of changing it to Christian Conference of Asia was basically trying to get more representation.
The Sixth Assembly took place in Penang in 1977, and the theme was Jesus Christ in Asian Suffering and Hope. And in 1981, the Seventh Assembly, held in Bangalore, India, was on Living in Christ with People. An important consideration for holding the Eighth Assembly in Seoul in 1985 was to express solidarity with the Korean churches and the Korean Minjung. The theme was on Jesus Christ sets free to serve. CCA's strong positions on various Asian situations, especially prophetic witness in responding to authoritarian oppressive regimes, caused the expulsion of CCA from Singapore in 1987.
CCA was expelled from Singapore. So CCA for a while sort of homeless.
The 9th Assembly was held in Manila in 1990 on the theme Christ Our Peace, Building a Just Society, in the context of the Philippines' recovery from a period of turmoil and conflicts. Manila's assembly affirmed that the mission of the church in today's context cannot be confined only to evangelism through proclamation of the gospel and service through welfare programs, but it is part of the mission of the church to work for the transformation of society where all people can live in dignity, peace, and harmony. The 10th Assembly met in Colombo, Sri Lanka in 1995, where the country was burning under the civil war, on the theme Hope in God in Changing Asia.
The Christian Conference of Asia, I found that a source of very great strength, because when we were up against all kinds of problems and difficulties in our own country, the knowledge that there was an ecumenical community that backs us and an ecumenical community that supports us and prays for us was a very great source of strength. And I have been able to do so much knowing that I have friends throughout the world who support us in our work.
5 years later, when the 11th Assembly was held in Tomohon, Indonesia, the theme was on Time for Fullness of Life for All. The 12th Assembly, held in Chiang Mai, Thailand, focused on the theme Building Communities of Peace for All, called for the ecumenical venture focusing for a non-bellicose world, together with people of other faiths, no faiths, or civil society groups. A message of prophetic call was echoed at the 13th Assembly held in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia in 2010 through its deliberations on the theme Called to Prophesy, Reconcile and Heal. The 14th Assembly held in Jakarta, Indonesia was a turning point in CCA's history, where CCA adopted a new constitution with drastic structural changes and mandates given to the newly elected executive and program committee to undertake a new program structure. Over the years, CCA has been focusing its programs and activities in various areas in order to evolve ecumenical responses from Asian perspectives on mission and evangelism, theology, ecumenical education, health and healing, women, youth, wealth, poverty, hunger crisis, war in Indochina, refugees, human rights, justice and service, migrant workers, and internally displaced people.
One of the programs that hit so much of my attention while working with CCA is the program on migrant workers, refugees, and internally displaced people. This is a huge program, and it is particularly focused on how does CCA help the member churches to be aware of the dynamics of migrant workers.
I'm also very much interested in women issues and how CCA has helped women programs in Myanmar, especially with women who are marginalized, women who are refugees, women who are incapable of caring for themselves. And we have had programs through Myanmar Council of Churches Women's Department, where these programs have raised up awareness for women and also helped them to build up income-generating projects.
CCA has also been actively involved in Christian art, Asian spirituality, ending child prostitution in Asian tourism, exploitation in third world tourism in Asia.
The American churches gave some money to the CCA and asked them to use that money to help Americans who were in Asia. Well, we looked at it and we said, well, now what can we really do about this? And one of the bright suggestions that came out of nowhere was, why don't we look at tourism? Because the largest number of Americans coming to Asia now are tourists.
Other programs include Asian rural youth programs, dignity and rights of children, diaconia and social action services through Asian Christian Services.
And there is much hope if CCA could engage more and more our young people into looking at the future with hope.
CCA has already contributed immensely